Sabrina the Teenage Witch, 1997 comic, issue 0. I'm just gonna call it the 90s comic from now on. It starts out with Sabrina talking to the audience, and she says that as her fans have known for years, she's a teenage witch. So there's continuity before this that I'm not aware of. I know that the live-action sitcom I watch is based on an Archie comic of the same name. That's a confusing panel to start out a comic with. She confusingly reveals that she wasn't born with magical powers. They're actually thrust onto her. Well, that doesn't make any sense to me, but at least it sounds interesting, creative. I wonder how they'll justify it. Like, it never made any sense to me that in Harry Potter, apparently there can be mortals born to wizards. Could something evolutionarily advantageous like magic be a recessive gene? Why? She says that it all began on her 16th birthday. We see her walk towards her house thinking that it was an exhausting day. I guess we don't need to know why. Maybe it was just typical boring high schooler stuff. Then, just as she wants to take a nap, she has a surprise party thrown for her. And her aunts are right there, dressed as stereotypical witches. But there's at least a twist that their witch costumes are blue and purple instead of just black colored. She probably always assumed they're only dressed like that because they happen to like the look. Because it's more realistic to assume someone has quirky fashion sense than assume they're a witch. Even if it's harder to believe that two people would be like that. Of the same family. I think historically the women who dressed like that were the alcohol brewers. And they got demonized as witches because men didn't like that women were being turned to for so much alcohol. Not to mention for herbs. So the witch's brew was alcohol. Her aunts are nice to her, with the green-haired one giving her a kiss in the cheek. And Sabrina thanks them all for coming, fortunately being grateful for the surprise party when all she really wanted was to take a nap. Maybe she's never had a surprise party before, or they're really rare, since you'd think she would have expected that on her birthday if they're the type to do that. A black-haired guy she thanks for coming here says that she's their friend, and she's told to blow out the candles and make a wish. She wishes that a guy she likes the looks of was here, and all of a sudden he gets teleported to her and asks where he is, which you'd think would draw everyone's attention to him immediately. I guess there wasn't anyone looking at him when he got teleported here. Still, he asks, "Where am I?" And Sabrina was just told to make a wish. I have to assume that the Other Realm Council or something is working full-time with surveillance and memory manipulating spells to keep mortals from realizing witches exist, because they're so obvious about it in this comic. So maybe some witches saw this and made sure people in the party would forget that he asked where he is, and would make sure his brain got rewritten so he'd come up with a scientific explanation for why he's here. Not to mention everyone else's would get rewritten. It's easy to come to this assumption and have faith that it's canon to the comic because I've seen the show, where there's an Other Realm Council and there are witches like that that don't want witches to be revealed to mortals. It's so generous of them to not want to freak mortals out and leave them to their own devices. Maybe they think of them as a reality TV show and want to observe how they do on their own. That's what makes the series so creative, that there's witches, but they don't want to take over the human world or anything. Sabrina is suspicious, and it cuts away instead of showing us what Sabrina and Brad talked about after he appeared at her party. So we don't get to see him start enjoying himself, or realistically go home right away all freaked out. And we don't see anyone react to him being at the party out of nowhere, but it's good to have fast pacing. After the party, Zelda tells Hilda that now that Sabrina is 16, it's time for them to tell her about acquiring her powers. It sure is weird that it took until 16 to get her powers, like the magic gene waited until then to activate. Either that, or a bunch of witches sent magic from the Star Rod to her when she hit 16. I guess it's a magical spell against all half-witches by the Witches' Council to make sure they don't abuse their powers as much on the human world. If it was just a natural genetic thing, I'd have to wonder why it's age 16 and not the very start of adolescence. Or better yet, adulthood, when the person would be most likely to be mature and responsible with their powers. Adolescence is still too early. It's an emotional time. Sabrina's told that they're not like everyday citizens of Riverdale. Zelda says that she knows Sabrina thinks they're odd, and Hilda reveals that strange things always pop up around them and says there's a reason for that. You'd think if that kept happening, Sabrina would have figured out they were magical a lot earlier. Or at least figured out that someone else magical was making those things pop up. But again, some witch's spy on them could be erasing her memory of that. Or more like brainwashing her into not concluding that it means they're witches and making her focus on other things instead. Hilda talks as if she expects Sabrina to remember strange things keep popping up around them. That's weird. Sabrina told the truth, but out of nowhere, it turns out she's snoring and she slept through their entire speech. Huh? I guess the reason she was lucky enough to fall asleep that fast, which I assumed wouldn't happen, is that because she's a witch, she subconsciously cast a spell to fall asleep as soon as she wanted, by just making a wish, and it came true without her even needing to point. This is fun. It's nice to go back to almost running into plot holes just to realize they can potentially be filled. Zelda says to put her to bed, and recklessly decides to tell her tomorrow. I guess because she's so full of compassion for her that she'd rather she get some sleep. But still, this is really important. So she could wake her up, tell her the truth, and then let her go back to sleep. Instead, the next morning, Sabrina runs out of the house, ignoring Hilda saying that they need to talk because she's late for school. As apparently, her aunts weren't smart enough to wake her up when she was oversleeping like real parents would. They also don't warp her to them. Sabrina wishes that she wasn't late, and then she asks how she got to school so fast. And she says she must have run faster than she thought. I hope she's getting suspicious, because she was also smart enough to realize that Brad popped up almost by magic earlier. She'd have to be a real dunce not to know this was supernatural. I mean, wait a minute. Does her household not have a car to drive her to school? A normal person would have had to rely on her parents to drive her to school, after missing the bus. I guess their aunts always got away with not having a car because they can warp whenever they want and use a broom. And they know that if anyone sees, their memory of it will get wiped by someone anyways. Sabrina looks behind her while running ahead, I guess because she's disoriented from warping to school and wants to see what's behind her. But this caused her to stupidly run into the principal while he's holding coffee, casually walking around in a school hallway holding that. So of course it gets spilled on him. I guess he had to be on his way to someplace as soon as possible, so he couldn't just drink all the coffee in his office. Sabrina wishes that didn't happen, and time reverses for her. She's like a genie. She doesn't even have to point like in the show. It actually gives the comic more freedom, how she can basically use any magical spell she wants around mortals and there'll never be any consequences. Well, the show is actually realistic about it. But here, Sabrina's a full-on escapist character, which makes sense for escapist fiction. Sabrina says that was strange, and then a girl walks up to her and jealously asks her what her boyfriend Brad was doing at her birthday party. Sabrina is gutsy enough to say to an angry girl's face that he might have been coming to his senses, and she says hands off. So she's insecure or paranoid of her boyfriend ditching her like she's not good enough for him. Has this happened to her before? Sabrina says that she'd love to see her get what's coming to her, but that girl had a right to be mad. Maybe she just really loves her boyfriend and is scared of losing him. I guess we're supposed to assume she's one of the mean girls of school, but a lot of people would have reacted like that. So this isn't strong enough of an establishing character moment for me to be told for sure that she's a bitch who does deserve it. But based on what very little I've seen of her, I still couldn't help but find it entertaining that she got smacked with a rope and tied up and basketballs got thrown at her. Because she made a false accusation of Sabrina when she didn't mean to warp Brad to her, and she yelled at her. But how is she supposed to know? I assume the Witches' Council wiped everyone's memories of this happening to her, or at least wiped her memories. It's too bad there has to be a masquerade so that people wouldn't panic and rise up against Sabrina, because having no explanation right away for how the hell the masquerade's being kept up is confusing. Sabrina's a relatable anti-hero because she just giggles and says that she likes what's happening rather than being horrified. She just giggled instead of being confused and questioning it, which would have been relatable. I guess she's not horrified because she instinctively knows it's okay that she's a witch and is comfortable with it, but consciously doesn't know the truth. She walks home in the evening, thinking that everything has been going her way, and Hilda says that finally she's home. Why in the world didn't she just teleport directly to Sabrina and tell her she's a witch? It's obvious that some witches off-screen are working overtime to erase people's memories of magic anyways, so at that point Hilda had no reason not to warp to her school in front of people. Sabrina's somehow surprised to be told that she's a witch. Maybe she's reacting negatively because witch sounds evil and she was hoping to be a wizard or genie instead. Maybe she was hoping it was just a magical pair of days and she doesn't want to feel like a freak. But she clearly loved being magical earlier. And it turns out sorceress and witch mean the same thing. How is she a fully fledged one if she's only half witch though? I mean, she has to be half witch, that's why she's aged at a normal rate. Zelda flies on a broomstick in front of her, and Hilda confidently zaps up some milk and cookies. I hope the cookies are warm. Sabrina says that explains everything that's been happening, and she says that she can change the world. Zelda tells her to be careful because it's not that easy. Hilda expects us to believe that magic takes a lot of practice and she needs to start with the baby steps when she's clearly been so good at magic the whole time that she's been perfectly executing spells by accident. If anything, she's a prodigy. Actually, I think this was handled more realistically in the show. Her first spell was that she was told to turn something to a pineapple, and she did that to someone else because that was the only spell she knew how to do. Wait, never mind, that's not realistic at all. I remember wondering how in the world that was the only spell she could do. It couldn't be that hard to imagine anything other than something turning to a pineapple. It's actually way more realistic in the comic, where she can do whatever she imagines. There are people who don't have a mind's eye, who can't imagine stuff at all. It'd be great if that was the canon explanation for how they're immortals born to wizards in Harry Potter, but I doubt it because that sounds too logical to be true. So I guess the writer never knew that was possible. Hilda summons a book of witchcraft to guide Sabrina through. Then Hilda says that Sabrina's levitating is getting good, and Sabrina says that she's starting to get the hang of it. Well, of course it'd be easy to imagine something floating over the ground. Sabrina floats Salem, who shockingly looks yellow instead of black for no reason at all. Aren't witches associated with black cats? This is gonna be off-putting. She giggles and says Salem looks so funny, and a girl asks what's going on in there and runs away screaming, saying that she knew Sabrina was weird. All because a house of witches didn't think to have their windows constantly covered in curtains. I'm gonna be confused if she still remembers Sabrina as a witch after this, because nobody else has had this reaction until now, and there's been no consequences. A love-struck Harvey wants to walk her to school, just like that, so already he's in love with her. He says that he's been hoping to ask her something and reminds her that the dance is coming up. It's so obvious that he's about to ask her to the dance since he mentioned it, and yet Sabrina interrupts him and thanks Brad for coming to the party. Maybe she's instinctively trying to make him think he came there willingly? He says it was interesting, being off-put. Apparently it takes a little while for the memory erasing to happen. Well, all he said is that it was interesting. Maybe he convinced himself that he chose to go to the party, and is only confused because he doesn't remember going there. I guess there's only so many people to rewrite memories of mortals at once, so they're bound to miss a few people for a couple of days. It's either I try to make sense of this comic, or I get mad at it constantly for not making as much sense. Anyways, because Sabrina has no social skills, she interrupted Harvey, and then she expresses interest in Brad right in front of him, and asks Harvey if he wanted to ask her something. It should be really obvious to her what he wanted to ask. Of course, he changes his mind because of Brad. Either she was somehow dumb enough to not realize what Harvey wanted to ask her, even after this, or she did know, but is insensitive and wanted to subtly get him to back off without hurting his feelings by turning him down directly. I'd rather believe a character isn't an idiot. I've had enough of that for a lifetime. Well, this is certainly interesting. In the show, Sabrina had a crush on Harvey from day one, and it was a big thing. But things are different here, which shows some new creative difference for the comic, rewarding me for reading it. It'd be boring if it was exactly the same as this sitcom, I guess. Sabrina wants to make Brad fall in love with her and zaps up her book. A girl screams behind her, and somehow Sabrina doesn't react to this at all, even though she's not deaf. Realistically, someone would be startled by someone screaming right behind them, especially after she did something sneaky. I guess Sabrina doesn't care. You'd think even if she wasn't screaming because of her, she'd still look behind her in curiosity. You'd think she'd assume that someone was getting bullied behind her, and she'd look behind her in concern. The girl runs away, wanting to call hard copy, somehow expecting someone to believe her. And Sabrina says a rhyming spell, wanting to make Brad fall in love with her. Why does it have to rhyme? Somehow, even though it was so obvious what she meant and wanted, he literally falls instead. Because status quo. It would be creepy if she succeeded. Maybe she wasn't concentrating hard enough, so she instinctively imagined falling. Maybe that's a common problem with using expressions and spells instead of just being direct. At least she's got some empathy here by saying ouch when he falls. So then how did she not get startled when the girl screamed right behind her? The writer probably realized it would lose the audience's sympathy if she succeeded here. She's told that witches can't control love. It's beyond even their powers. It would make more sense if we were told that a long time ago, some witches enchanted the love spell out of every witch from then on, for very good reason. And then so much time passed, and then lies were spread that even witches can't make people fall in love with them with magic, when all they should have to do is imagine the person smiling and hugging and kissing them. But maybe that couldn't make them actually happy, just force them to move in a certain way. Zelda gives Sabrina some good advice that she can do nice things that attract Brad to her. So far, she and Hilda seem to have the same personality. That's disappointing. Sabrina thanks them, and is considerate enough to want to do something nice for them as a result. Hilda looks in the mirror and complains that she and Zelda are not getting any younger. So Sabrina gets the idea to give them a makeover. Oh, that's a pleasant surprise. She actually asks permission. Hilda is smart enough to be hesitant at first because she's new to magic. Zelda changes her mind though. That seems like a role reversal for them. Let me guess, she'll somehow screw up. She says they'll need a shampoo, and they get splashed with a ton of water, somehow. How hard can it be for her to simply visualize shampoo in the right parts of their face? She's too stubborn to give up after this embarrassment, and instead says it's time to dry them and warp some dryers to their heads, and then their heads get stuck in them. Seems like the story cares more about trying to be funny than not confusing you. She can't get them loose, and then says that she keeps forgetting she's a witch now and zaps the thing away. Zelda tells her to skip the beauty school stuff. Wasn't that obvious right away? Hilda's reckless enough to tell her to zap them with a direct look, when she should have immediately gotten the hint that Sabrina is somehow failing catastrophically at something that should be easy and simple. It would be very hard for her to imagine her aunts looking any other way than how she's used to, especially as humans. But then they should be looking the same. Why would she imagine them having all these ugly transformations when she's trying to make them look better? This goes beyond choking at it. She says stupidly that she thought dodos were extinct and she's trying to be serious. Huh? Shouldn't she know that this is just another transformation of her aunts and these can't possibly be the actual dodo birds because they're dressed like her aunts and are too tall for that? And she must have imagined dodos on purpose. If that was just written as a joke, that joke didn't work. Meanwhile, her friend arrives at her door wanting to get to the bottom of this. She's confused that the door is already open for no reason, and then she runs away screaming at seeing her aunts transformed into monsters, asking them not to hurt her. All one of Sabrina's aunts says in response is a snark that she's not worth the effort, and she calls her dear. She's not worried at all that a mortal just saw something supernatural. So it has to be a canon theory then. She either knows that her memories of these supernatural events are gonna end up erased anyways, or she figures that it doesn't matter because no one will ever believe her. I wonder if there's a bunch of people on Sabrina's version of Earth labeled as conspiracy theorists because they believe witches exist. There'd be entire forums. It's pretty mean that this was all she said to her and she didn't reassure her better than that. Sabrina somehow thinks that she can't seem to top this when she just made them ugly monsters. I don't see how she could screw up. It looks like I was right. She's just a dumb blonde. Finally, logic kicks in, and she gives her aunt some beautiful makeovers. Zelda reminds me of, isn't this the hairstyle she's gonna end up with later in the comic? Hilda's hairstyle seems a bit familiar too. Still, the fact that she's been screwing up so much makes it confusing that she did it right here. I wish the comic just cut to this point, cut out all the screw-ups of it. She says that they actually look like they're from the century now. And there's a pleasant surprise as they're grateful and compliment each other instead of being mad because now they look different. They must have been making a conscious choice to keep dressing the way they did. They must have been very stubbornly making a fashion statement, showing witch pride. And not to mention are clearly not afraid at all of being discovered as witches then. So I guess they're gonna go back to their old look pretty soon because status quo is God, and the excuse will be that they just prefer to stick with what they're used to and be themselves. They just like their looks for now. Because if they dressed like witches for so long, why would it be in character for them to want to stick with these makeovers? Sabrina's told to go patch things up with that girl who just came in. And Sabrina is totally casual about agreeing. I guess realistically she heard her earlier. And she didn't care at all about her reaction, like a sociopath. Wasn't Sabrina in the show more of a constant worrywart people pleaser? Then it turns out that her aunts were the ones who actually gave themselves a good makeover. And Hilda says that Sabrina could use a morale booster. So rather than reality eventually ensuing and Sabrina getting the spell right, her aunts had to do it, when there was no excuse for her not getting things right the first time. She runs up to Emily and says that she didn't see what she thinks she saw. Then Harvey runs up to her saying look out while holding a remote and a plane is flying near her. Oh, let me guess, she'll get hit in the head. And never mind, she stays conscious and says that she's not through with Sabrina yet and wants to get this checked out. Still, I guess the spy witches will take this as an excuse to make her forget about the supernatural stuff she saw, by erasing her memories of those later on, and letting her think it was the head injury that did it. If they always had to make head injuries happen to provide scientific justification though, eventually I'd wonder why everyone in Riverdale didn't end up with brain damage from all the head injuries. And their town will be world famous for how common head injuries are there. So I guess their head injuries get healed. I really hate that Harvey has black hair instead of hair like he does in the show. That's definitely gonna take some getting used to. But I know it could be worse. Harvey asks why he can't do anything right, being insecure and self-aware, and says that he can't even make a plane work correctly. Is that supposed to be another establishing character moment? I guess she could do better then. That makes me feel better about the fact that his crush is still unrequited. He says there goes his science project. She's nice enough to decide to help him out. She tells him to try it again. I guess he can't see the flash of light from her hands because he's immortal and she doesn't want him to see it. The show did a better job by not always showing a special effect from magic so that Sabrina could actually be subtle about it. Harvey agrees to try it again just because she asks, so she's a good influence on him. Then he's happy because the plane is flying around beautifully. Sabrina thinks she's starting to get the hang of this. Let me guess, it's gonna backfire on her next time and I won't know how. Somehow, she's arrogant enough to immediately assume she's done a perfect job at this point after all the times she's sucked at transforming her aunts. Sabrina asks her aunts if they're coming to the cheerleading expo. Hilda says they have to show off their new looks, and I'm interested that Sabrina is a cheerleader in the comic. That's new. All this new stuff from the show helps make up for the fact that it's about a teenager going to high school on Earth. That I'm always looking forward to the next spell. You know there's great pacing in a Sabrina story when spells like that happen all the time and you don't have to wait too long. Sabrina warps to just outside her high school, and her dialogue implies that her family has a car. So then why didn't she go to her aunt's to get driven to school instead of running and accidentally warping to school? I guess her car was in the shop, and it just came back. A girl named Amy says that she sees that Sabrina hasn't left her boyfriend alone. But how? Aside from her thanking Brad for going to her party and him saying one confused sentence, she has left him alone. And Amy didn't even see Sabrina talk to him. I love that she's called Amy so much. It perfectly justifies how jealous and clingy she is. She's told that she's nuts rather than Sabrina simply pointing out what I did and making herself clear. She sarcastically tells her good luck anyways and says break a leg. Oh, then she says literally. So then why did she say good luck? They start practicing their routine, and then Harvey's remote plane flies past Amy because Sabrina forgot to unzap it. You'd think it would have run out of battery by this point. Why would she make her spell give you infinite energy? At least this is entertaining. You never know what's going to happen next. The whole plot is unpredictable. It's like a series of shorts. The plane goes to the audience, and someone says it's got his toupee. But since when does the principal have one? He's always bald. He doesn't look like the toupee is anywhere near it. Then the plane goes after it, and Sabrina says that she can't unzap it until she gets a hold of it because it's moving too fast. Maybe no one hears her because of all the screaming in the gym. But seriously, is there actually a limited range for her magic? Won't the range be as far as she can see, whatever she can see, even if it's behind a screen? Shouldn't she just be able to imagine it dropping to the floor and that's it? Because I don't see how a remote plane could outrun magic. Maybe magic isn't actually that fast. I'd expect flashes of light to be as fast as light. Well, if it is that slow, I hope that's canonically explained as how magic actually works and she's not just sucking. Emily bets that Sabrina had something to do with this. Amy believes her, probably assuming that she activated the remote control plane the normal way. Why wouldn't she think she'd want revenge? Then the plane starts pulling Amy away, after, I guess she grabbed it to try to stop it. Then she gets sent to the pool and she giggles. Hilda says right in front of Harvey and her that Sabrina zapped that plane, and she says that she did. And she says that she doesn't want them to unzap it because it worked out in her favor. I guess everyone who heard all that was memory wiped afterwards. Maybe by Sabrina's aunts themselves. And that's the end of the story. That took forever to review, but it was fun. It was like reviewing early Archie Sonic again. Things were a bit confusing, but I could come up with explanations for them that seemed to be believable in universe, instead of just being baffled. This story was by Dan Parent. Wow, what a last name. And as the logic would dictate for the first issue, it was about Sabrina being told by her aunts that she has magical powers now. Though it's surprisingly not explained why they only showed up for her 16th birthday. She is clearly not mature enough for them yet, because she's happy with them messing things up for Amy and is barely even trying to not be discovered. And yet she freaks out and tries to tell Emily that she didn't see what she thought she did. A lot of this is just a series of random events. The memorable thing that matters throughout the story is that a girl named Emily finds out Sabrina's a witch, and in the first issue ever, that'd be gutsy if it stuck. And it's really confusing that she and Brad are still able to remember the supernatural events that they witnessed throughout the issue. Because based on how commonly the witches use magic around mortals, it's like they aren't even trying to hide it. And the comic's been telling me that there's basically no consequences to being like that. And yet Emily remembers what she keeps seeing the whole time and is mad and freaked out. It's contradicting the rule of the comic. I'm forced to assume that the spy witch is using memory rewriting to keep up the masquerade are just taking a little long to get to them. They're probably swamped with work because of careless use of magic like this. Considering that Sabrina was shown to be a prodigy at magic, effortlessly using it perfectly from the start before she even knew she was a witch, it became very confusing that she suddenly started screwing up spells with no explanation of what she did wrong. I remember the Wizards of Waverly Place actually tried to explain what was being done wrong when a spell failed. I wish that show had way more magic in it per episode though. Cause the first episode was really boring when it went back to it. Like, I don't care about the guys trying to impress a girl. Her screwing up magic was trying to be a source of comedy, but it didn't work. I guess it was trying to balance her. She's an escapist character already, so I guess the writers think they have to make her screw up magic so that the audience won't get too jealous of and intimidated by her. It's already creepy that she's enough of an unscrupulous anti-hero to simply giggle when a girl is tied up by ropes or into a pool because of her instead of being confused, and to immediately consider forcing a guy to fall in love with her. Which, do I even need to explain the implications for the character there? At least in Rick and Morty, Rick called Morty out on asking him to make a love potion and called it a roofie potion later. But it is more relatable of Sabrina to not be a pure good hero trying to be good and do the right thing at every opportunity like Sally Acorn. It'd be totally unrealistic to expect a teenager to not be selfish if they got magical powers. Maybe she'd become better when she's older. She matured in the show. It's good that she tried to use magic to help Harvey with his plane. So I definitely want to count every time that she used magic to help people and it actually worked out. Because her using magic to help people tries to make up for the fact that she's kind of an anti-hero. This was at least a consistently interesting and entertaining story. It confused me a bit, not trying to explain things it should have, especially for the first issue. But I could forgive it because I loved the creativity and how it was different from the show, excluding Salem, who is barely a character in this story. This is definitely a comic I'm interested in. The only thing I dread about reviewing it is how long it takes. But I definitely like it better than a certain other comic because at least it's creative and not filled with annoying characters. Well, Harvey and Sabrina can be kind of annoying, but they could be a lot stupider or meaner.